Good afternoon. Welcome to Con-ver-sa-tion 2017. It is so great to see all of you back with us here at CMC. I'm Mo Wright, Chair of the Board and President at Raymond Consulting. Today, the Columbus Metropolitan Club is pleased to present Con-ver-sa-tion 2017, The Changing Faces of Conversation, CMC's second annual Con-ver-sa-tion event, and it's both a celebration and it's our only annual fundraiser. So we thank you all for being here. You probably noticed that ticket prices were just a little higher this week to account for our fundraiser. But I want you to know that money is going to the CMC Founder and Leadership Fund at the Columbus Foundation. So you are helping support the long-term viability, our rainy day fund of sorts for CMC. And so we thank you for being here today, and just know that your proceeds are making sure that the community conversation will continue for many years to come. Support from CMC comes from a variety of sources, and we'd like to thank our honorary founders who've committed for the long haul with us, and they include American Electric Power, WBNS 10 TV, and the Dispatch Media Group, and each of them are all represented by many associates here today. We also have table hosts with us today with Homeport and Hollywood Casino. Round of applause for all of our sponsors, supporters, and for all of you for being here. So despite the rhetoric and the desire to make America great again, what that looks like tends to be up for debate and pretty nebulous. Facts and demographics, however, are concrete and provide significant insights about the future of our community and what community will even mean in years to come. They paint a very different picture from what we see today to what community and how we define America might look in the future. Let's delve into the future and examine the changing faces of conversation with our guest today. We welcome the Director of Urban Investment Strategies Center at the UNC Chapel Hill and Professor and Dr. Jim Johnson. Welcome. And to help moderate the conversation, Director and Designer at the Design Group, Michael Bongiorno. Podium's yours.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Oh, good. I can't hear. I'm delighted to be with you, have the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you this afternoon. I must confess it's a bit scary to have to speak right after lunch. So what I typically do when I find myself in this situation, I whisper to my audience the same thing the famed Hollywood actress Elizabeth Taylor said to each one of her 8 husbands when she was standing at the altar about to be married. She whispered to each one of them, say, "Honey, I won't keep you long. I promise to be quick, fast, and in a hurry today." Ladies and gentlemen, our nation, every region, and every state, and every community, including the great community of Columbus, Ohio, and the larger region, Central Ohio region, is in the midst of an unprecedented demographic transformation. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, you're going to have to buckle your seatbelt to deal with them. And if you ignore them at your own peril. There are lots of things you can debate today. Quite honestly, I'm tired of them politically. But what I want to suggest to you is that basic demography is not one of them. I assure you, if you're 5 years old today, 5 years from now, you're going to be 10 years old. Your birthday comes the same time every year. You just add 1 to what it was last year, and voila, you got it. In fact, every year when I go in for my annual review with my dean, I come out with a big raise. Because I walk in and I tell him, I said, you know, when we met last year, I was 62 years old. You know what? I'm 63 now. And when we meet next year, I'm going to be 64. It's called forecasting. I'm the best in the business. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, there are 2 colorful demographic processes that undergird those changes, and I want to share a few thoughts with you about those 2 colorful processes. They're called the browning and graying of America. I want to talk about those 2 colorful processes, and I want to talk about an issue that I think is going to challenge us in the future that exists at the intersection of the browning and graying of America. It's called the triple whammy of geographic disadvantage, and talk a little bit at the end about what it means all for Central Ohio, and I'll try to weave stuff in. Those 2 colorful processes, the browning and graying of America, are changing the complexion of our society. All of our social, economic, and political institutions are going to have to change as a function of both browning and gray. These 2 processes are going to dramatically transform the workforce. They're going to dramatically transform workplaces. They're going to dramatically transform consumer markets. Everything is going to change as a function of these 2 issues. Let me talk first about the browning of America. The browning of America is really about immigration-driven population change in our country. Hotly contested issue today, but a very important one. If you take a long-range view of immigration in our country, what you will see is that from the turn of the 20th century until about the mid-1960s, we kept immigration pretty low in our country. And then you see after 1960, precipitous increase in immigration and the foreign-born population in our country. Prior to 1965, we had an immigration law in this country that said if we were going to allow the foreign-born to enter our country, it was important that they not upset the existing racial and ethnic balance of our country as it existed at the turn of the 20th century. So we had an express preference for people who were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons, people to come to America, learn to speak English, anglicize their names, so this thing called a melting pot was supposed to work. We had a preference for people from Europe. That all changed in the mid-1960s. In fact, if you want to check your immigration history, you'll go back into 1880s and you will see that we had something called a Chinese exclusion law. Shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be, quote unquote, difficult to assimilate in the mainstream society. Fast forward to the first decade of the 20th century, we defined something that we refer to as the Asiatic barrier region, that included Japan. Shouldn't be allowed to come to America. So we controlled our population composition through a bunch of really racist theories about cultural inferiority and all. That all changed in the mid-1960s via something called the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. Put a pin in it because it's one of the most profound pieces of legislation in our history. It eliminated those discriminatory provisions based on geographic origin, opening up the doors of our country to people who heretofore had not been allowed to come in large numbers. Basically people from Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. You see that precipitous increase. Fundamental shift in geographic origin, fundamental shift in phenotype, and fundamental shift in the numbers of people coming to America. Today, the new numbers 2015 just out. It's about 45 million people here in our country today who are foreign born. And you ask, who are they? Well, about 46% of them are Latino. You'll see the second largest number are Asian. Ladies and gentlemen, these are all people of color. You will note that from this graphic that the percentage of our foreign-born population is non-Hispanic white is only at about 18%. If you were to look at those numbers prior to 1965, they would have been flipped because we had this preference for people from European communities coming to our society. When I talk about the browning of America, I'm talking about the sources of growth in our population moving forward, and it's going to be, much of the growth is going to be driven by those folks. At the same time, this browning of America is driven by immigration. It's also driven by a fundamental shift in marriage patterns in America. And the bigger presentation I do, I say marrying out is in. As all of you know, until the mid-1960s, it was even illegal for blacks and whites to marry. That all changed. But I'm not talking about black-white marriage. I'm talking about a more profound shift in marriage patterns. You will see here that from 1980 to about 2008, the out-marriage rate, means you marry someone of a different racial and ethnic group than you belong to, doubled among newly married couples in America. And it went from 3% to about 8% of all for currently married folks. Well, who's doing all this hooking up in kind of strange ways here? Well, about 41% of those marriages are between Hispanics and whites, about 15% are between Asians and whites, and about 16% of the cases, both marriage partners are non-white, black and Asian, Asian and Hispanic or whatever. You note that black-white marriage is the smallest share, and then there's about 17% of them, I don't know who the heck they are, but they're having fun, and they're hooking up, dramatically transforming our communities. Now, I must say that the private sector has gotten on board with this out-marriage thing much quicker than the public sector and government sector and the like. How many of you all are familiar with the Cheerios commercial? Released at the Super Bowl several years ago. Black guy on a couch, asleep. His kid runs up and dumps Cheerios on his chest, and it's clear that this kid is what? It's mixed. And then the camera shifts to the wife, and the wife is what? White. Did you follow Twitter? Please don't, but if you do, did you follow Twitter? Ugly stuff. People didn't like it, but I like Cheerios, heart healthy. And the company wasn't bothered by it, so the next year at the Super Bowl, they had another commercial with the same family. And the woman pregnant again. What are they saying? Get over it. This is America. My point is that this out-marriage rate combined with immigration is changing the complexion of society, and what it means is that moving forward, People won't fit into the nice and neat little crucibles we're accustomed to putting them in, and they won't allow you to put them in those crucibles. But it raises more broader questions about whose history do we teach? How do we think about consumer markets and the like? This is a huge issue, but it contributes to the browning of America. This stuff is so important. You want to ask, how big is it in America? Well, we added 27 million people to our population during the first decade of the new millennium. 92% of them were non-white, and 55% of them were Latino. Here in the Central Ohio region, 239,000 people added to your population. About 60% of them were non-white. About 17% of them were Latino. When I talk about the browning of America, I'm talking about the source of growth in all of this thing. This is so important to your future, ladies and gentlemen, because what you have to understand is that migration and immigration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? It means far more young people migrate than immigrate than old people. That means old people don't move. They move slower and at a lower propensity than old people. There's another piece to that story. Please don't repeat this anywhere. You could lose your job. In fact, I'm denying I say this before I say it. Young people are more likely to have children than old folk. You put those two things together, higher fertility and immigration, what you have is an impact on the age structure in your community. Look at it. 2014, median age of the U.S. population, 38 years old. Half of us older than that, half of us younger than that. What's the median age of a Hispanic in America? Last row, 28 years old. Now, how many of you have heard in the immigration debate, particularly illegal immigration, that Hispanics are a burden on the healthcare system in America? You heard that? Don't get quiet on me now. You heard it? Okay. What kind of major health problems do you have when your median age is 28? Before you answer that question, somebody tell me what the median age of a white non-Hispanic in America is. 43 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're in your 20s, what kind of health problems do you have, if you have any at all? They're acute crisis. You've done something stupid, like stick your finger in the lawnmower and you got to go get it glued back on. When you move from your 20s to your 40s, what kind of health problems do you have? They move from acute to what? Chronic. Which one costs the most? Trust me, chronic. I lost my wife to cancer at 48 years old. Her treatment the last 6 months of life, $5,000 a week. Half of what you hear makes no sense. One more piece to the story. This is for the ladies in the room. Y'all can tell the men to close their eyes, their ears if you want, but I think they need to hear this. Ladies, there's something in demography called completed fertility. Okay? I'm not going to give you the big theory today. Come to Chapel Hill, give us $100,000 a year. I'm happy to tell you. Let me give you the pop version, ladies. It's when you tell your husband, go take out the trash. Ain't nothing else happening here. Okay? And completed fertility for women occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. There's this precipitous drop in fertility, okay? What's the median age of a non-Hispanic white female in America? 42 years old. What's the median age of a Hispanic female? 29. Now, you will note between the 42, the two yellow lines, and the 29, those are all women of color. And you'll note a 10 to 20-year gap in the median age. You know what that gap is? It's your fertility gap. We know exactly where kids are going to come from. Now, I know that some of y'all in the room in your 40s tomorrow, I'm going home and fix this tonight. I say, go ahead. Leave now. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to do what a 29-year-old can do. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, the message to you is you build a wall around your country and try to keep everybody out, you got a slight problem. It's called the future competitiveness of your nation because you're going to need the talent to propel your nation. Now, it's a fundamental demographic issue. It's not unique to us or you here in this region. This is a global phenomenon in terms of aging and the like. We see the impact. 1990, 66% of all births in America were to non-Hispanic white families. That dropped to 50% in 2008. For the first time in history, in 2011, non-Hispanic white births dropped below 50%. It's unlikely to go the other way because of declining fertility and the next problem that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. We know where this growth is going to occur, but our policies in terms of immigration and the like are a competitiveness issue and challenge for us in terms of workforce and a whole range of other things. We're talking about a heck of a color adjustment, the browning of America. In 2005, 67% of our population was non-Hispanic white. 10 years earlier, it was about 74%. We now think by 2050, the non-Hispanic white share is going to drop below 50%. It's unlikely to go the other direction because of the dynamics that I'm explaining to you now. What's happening in the Ohio region? You're growing. The first decade of the new millennium, the Midwest grew by 3%, the state grew by 1%, your central region, Franklin County and 14 other counties here, grew by about 12.3%. So you're growing more rapidly than other places. And to give you some sense of the browning of America, net gain in the region of 239,000 people. 39,000 of them were Hispanic, growing at 128%. Your white population grew by 96,000, but only 6%. Double-digit growth for all people of color except American Indians, Alaska Natives. Your browning is going on. Here it's not as profound in other places, but it's the trend is the same, and you need to be mindful of it because it's all important for you. Look at the age structure. Your median age for women is 38, in the 30s, high 30s, late 40s here, but look at that Latino population in the 20s and the like. You'll need every one of them. You're going to need every one of them. You send them home, you got the Bengay crowd left. So what's happened since 2010, 2015? The Midwest has grown by 1.4%. Ohio under 1%. You, fortunately, 5.4% of the region. You're a boom region, but you need everybody. You need to understand the dynamic and the compositional effects of the sources of your growth. A lot of migration here, about 50,000 migrants. 30,000 of them international migrants since 2010 in your region. All of this is doubly important because at the same time that your population is browning, it is also graying. Browning is about immigrants and people of color changing the complexion of your society. Graying is about the aging of your native-born population. Now, I think it's a fair question to ask. How do I know if I'm part of the graying of America? 4 ways. Number 1, if you got difficulty seeing this screen, you're part of the graying of America. Number 2, if you got to go to the restroom twice before I finish this presentation, you're part of the graying of America. And number 3, if you fall asleep, it ain't my fault. It's whatever you ate for lunch. Graying of America is about 3 things. It's about changes in longevity. It's about declining fertility. And it's about a group of us born between 1946 and 1964 with a boomer cohort. We are living much longer today, ladies and gentlemen, than we ever envisioned. When we instituted Social Security in 1935, the average person turning 65 then was going to live another 12.7 years. That same person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years. And we now think living to 100 on a routine basis is well within reach. And there's one school of thought that says the person who will live to 130 has already been born. Why? Medical advances extended our lives. Y'all are eating better sometimes. Y'all work out sometime. And now we got this thing called regenerative medicine. We got a scientist in North Carolina who's regenerated a bladder. Your bladder wear out, we'll sell you another one. Just tell me what color you want. We're working on every body part now that thinks that we can extend life. And Google just several years ago developed a company where the whole purpose of the company is to defeat death by prolonging life. It's looking for big relationships and big data mining and the like. And we know, we got these longevity hotspots all over the world that people live forever. Declining fertility. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a couple, to replace yourself, you need 2.1 kids to have 2.1. Don't ask me about the 0.1. You just got to be rocking and rolling, okay? If it takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself, who's replacing themselves in America? You got one group. Got one group. Non-Hispanic whites have had a total fertility rate of 1.9 for about 2 decades. The average family has 1.9 kids. Now, I quite frankly don't know how you get 0.9 of a kid. I taught a few of them at Chapel Hill. But you need 2.1 kids to replace yourself. When you're below replacement level fertility, how do you grow? Only way you can do it is import it, ladies and gentlemen. Understand that that's the fundamental thing. Then there's a group of us who were born between 1946 and 1964. Let me see a show of hands. 1946 and 1964. Some of the rest of you don't have your hands up lying, but it's okay. Those of us who were born between 1946 and 1964 are part of the post-World War II hormonal rush in America. Our fathers went off to World War II and came back home and got busy. Got busy to the tune of producing 81 million of us. We're the boomer generation. And on January 1st of 2011, the first boomer baby boomer born in America turned 65 and became eligible for what? Everything. Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, for the next 20 years, we boomers will be turning 65 to the tune of $8,000 per day. Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. Look at the numbers. 45 to 64 in 2010, 81 million people, 19 million people, 20 million people moving into that cohort of about 32% growth rate. You will note the second most rapidly growing population is 65 plus. Why? Because we're living longer after 65. When I talk about the silver tsunami, that's what I'm talking about. It's the pig and the python marching out. But we got a slight problem, ladies and gentlemen. Look, what happened to the 25 to 44-year-old population? It actually declined. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. What does that mean? You're paying in, somebody else is spending your money. What needs to be happening to that 25, 44-year-old population in order for you people who claim you're not boomers to get any money? They got to be working. And that population's got to be growing, but we got a slight problem. Some of the debilitating diseases that beset us boomers and pre-boomers later in life are now besetting Gen X and Gen Y earlier in life, leading to the early onset of death and disability. And one of the biggest issues today is the opiate crisis. That's what it looked like in 1999. That's what it looks like in 2014. 11,000 people hospitalized daily and 91 dying daily. Prime working age people in the prime of their lives that need to be doing what? Contributing so that you can sustain those systems. So understand, ladies and gentlemen, your competitiveness in the global marketplace in the future hinges upon the ability to manage the browning and graying of America simultaneously, because these two things are real. 8,000 per day, I told you we're aging. You look pretty good because you're growing as a region, but you up here in terms of the younger population, and you got slower losses in the 25 to 44, your university town and the like, but your senior population is growing more rapidly than the nation here in Central Ohio. And here in Columbus, what's the most rapidly growing population? And when you look at that older adult population, you got one generation households, you got two generation and three generation households here. Most seniors, one generation, they live by themselves, either single adults or the married couple by themselves. But increasingly, as the economy has gone wreak havoc, you got older adults now who are, some of them live independently. You got a bunch of caretaker households, older adults who are taking care of their children and their grandchildren in their household. And you got younger, non-elderly people who are taking care of their older parents, in-laws, and things of that nature. I've developed this for you. You got about 3,861 persons living in group quarters. The median age is 81 to 71% white, 67% female, with a disability count of 3.68, with $17,000 in income. If you want to look at single persons by themselves, about 36,000 of those, 76 median age, 78% white, 70% female, getting to a disability count of about $34,000. Husband and wives in their early 70s, $42,000 a year. Hard to live on that. Elderly single parents, this is that second generation, a householder who's 75 years old, got a 46-year-old child in the household, earning $19,000 a year. There's no intergenerational mobility there. Same thing for elderly married couple with a child who's 34 years old, earning $19,000 a year. Challenge. Whew, tired. How many minutes I got? 6 minutes. Y'all invited me here. I'm going to take all day. Second, so that elderly thing is something you got to pay attention to. But here's the issue that, ladies and gentlemen, I think strikes at the heart of our competitiveness, both nationally and here in the local community. This triple whammy of geographic disadvantage exists at the intersection of browning and graying. I'm going to develop a typology, a racial typology of the U.S. for you. These are It's at the county level. These counties are racial generation gap counties. What does that mean? In these counties, the adult voting age population are predominantly white, aging empty nesters. But the school age population is predominantly non-white. What kind of support for public education you think you get there? They ain't got no dog in the fight. My kids are out of school. I'm most concerned about what? Retirement, amenities, crime, and safety, and they vote self-interest, okay? These counties are majority-minority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly non-white. School age population is predominantly non-white. Lots of interest in public education. What's missing? No money there. They're all low-wealth counties, okay? The gray counties, everything else on that map, are majority-majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly white. School age population is predominantly white. Lots of support for education, lots of interest in the like. But in those counties, about a fifth of the kids who go to school there are kids of color. But if you peer veneer the veneer and go into the school districts, what you will find for the kids of color, they're one in two, in either of two situations. They're either attending racially isolated schools within those districts, or in the quote-unquote good schools, they are underrepresented in the college prep tracks, honors, AP, IB, and the like. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, I've painted a picture of you where the new growth is going to come from, and those kids are between a rock and a hard place through no fault of their own. That's whammy number one. Whammy number two is segregation. These neighborhoods right here are 60% or more non-Hispanic white, okay? These neighborhoods are 60% or more non-white. And the yellow neighborhoods are transitioning from white to non-white. We call that hyper-racial segregation, separate and unequal, and it rivals the segregation before Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, the year that I was born, okay? Whammy number two. Whammy number three is childhood poverty. These neighborhoods right here, 40% or more of the kids that walk in the school door come from households with incomes below the poverty level. Those neighborhoods, between 25 and 39% of the households enter schools with incomes below the poverty level. We combine those two things, we call that concentrated poverty. The yellow neighborhoods, the poverty rate's below 25%, we call that concentrated affluence. When I talk about a triple whammy of geographic disadvantage, I'm talking about the average kid that walks in the school door today is exposed or come from a background or are at risk to those three things almost simultaneously. You want to talk about how many kids? About 9.8 million kids got all of those things, and that 9.8 million is 93% non-white. About 12 million kids got two of those things. That's 81% non-white. Single whammy, one of those things, 20 million kids, 39% non-white. For 32 million kids, life's pretty good. They're not dealing with any one of those things. Now remember that your growth is at the top of this scale, not at the bottom in terms of where future talent is going to come from. I wish that was the only thing. These are food deserts that go on top of that, where kids come to school insecure, food insecurity and the like. Don't feed the body, nothing can happen with the mind. And those are suspensions. 3 million kids suspended from school annually, and 250,000 of them referred to the police for misdemeanor charges as early as the first grade. Okay? It used to be the third grade, but we had a teacher in North Carolina who referred a first grade kid to the school resource officer for threatening her with the first grade scissors. Now, I've been out of school a long time, but I remember my first grade scissors. And what I remember about them, they were round at the tip, dull as you know what, and wouldn't cut construction paper. And you have a teacher that gets a kid suspended with a misdemeanor charge in first grade. That's the scarlet letter of everything. Everything. 3 million kids. Those are black kids, those are the Latino kids. Creating a whole disadvantage for people. What does it look like in your region? I'm just going to run through this. So you are kind of a majority set of counties, your region here. 29% in terms of kids, 29% non-white, 71% white. You see the breakdown there. So segregation. Those are your predominantly white areas. Those are your predominantly non-white areas, and those are neighborhoods that are transition, mixed tracks from white to black product. And you can look at the numbers when you want to across. We've broken it down for you. Poverty, extreme poverty, high poverty, concentrated affluence in your region. Okay? You look at the distribution across those three groups. That's your triple whammy when you look at your region. You're going to need every one of those kids to propel you moving forward. But I don't want to leave y'all on a bad note. There's some golden opportunities out there. The aging boomer market. Everybody focuses on millennials, want to build for millennials. Millennials ain't got no money. In fact, we call them boomerang crumb snatchers. Why? You send them off to college, they graduate with a ton of debt, and where are they? Back home. Boomerang. This is your money. The last generation has any money. $17 trillion, $3 trillion in this country. And boomers are going to redefine what it means to be old. Okay? Real opportunity. Majority aren't. The majority are working and play little different from the 40s. Isn't that our obsession over arthritis, incontinence, and dementia? See, but here's the thing. Seniors don't like to be seniored out reminded that they're old. The company that does a great job of making products for seniors take great pains not to make products for what? Seniors. Y'all heard this thing about 60 is the new 30, right? Huh? They got commercials on TV. 60 is the new 30. These women 60 years old on TV wearing yellow spandex twitching. Okay? I turned 60 a couple years ago. I hate to tell you 60 is 60, but don't believe it. You know. Sorry. Encore entrepreneurship. If you want to talk about economic development, ladies and gentlemen, focusing on the 50-plus population and their desire to be entrepreneurs is really important. 1/4 of the 44 to 70 population interested in becoming entrepreneurs. Americans 55 to 64 start business ventures at a higher rate than the 20-somethings. New entrepreneurs, 23% of them were 55 to 64 in 2010, up from 14% in 1996. And most important, 50% of the businesses started by the 50-plus entrepreneurs still operating 5 years later. They have a lot higher survival rate than the 20-somethings. And the reason for that is they say encore entrepreneurs are alleged to have double ESP, experience, expertise, seasoned judgment, and proven performance. Another opportunity, how do we help seniors age gracefully in their homes and their communities? How do we keep them out of expensive nursing facilities? And what role can digital technologies play in all of that is a big thing. Because as we age, we have these constraints, ladies and gentlemen, where things that we taken for granted that we can do in the built environment as younger people become challenges for us and risk for us as we age. And so everything in the built environment has to change as a function of an aging population. The pedestrian crossing signal at the street assumes that the person crossing the street walks 4 feet per second. The average senior walks 2 to 3 feet per second. Vancouver, Canada just outlawed doorknobs in all new construction. Why would you outlaw doorknobs in all new construction? Arthritis. If you're arthritic, a doorknob might as well be a 9mm gun held to your head if you can't do what? That. This is a very nice facility. I'm going to say this and then I'm going to run. But it is not senior friendly. Okay? What's wrong with the chairs you're all sitting in? No arms. Lighting ain't cool. Oh, that carpet right there, I think I'm going to fall on purpose before I leave. Most organizations, most physical public infrastructure, private infrastructure, one slip and fall from a major lawsuit. Everything has to change, and this is the new opportunity for doing things. Urban design, visitability of institutional settings, the library, the post office, the courthouse, everything has to change as a function of an aging population. The big thing in cities, senior fitness parks and playgrounds, and university accessible transport system, complete ordinances, extended walk time, senior-friendly signage, all the things y'all don't want to own up to that you need. What do we got to do? Manage this transition from grade. We've got to embrace immigrants. We've got to devise strategies to address your triple whammy. I think the elder care economy offers real opportunities, and you got to pursue age-friendly economic development. Speaking of old, I'm tired. I'm through.
Well, thank you, Dr. Johnson. That was inspiring. You know, you and I were talking briefly at the table about some of the things you touched on in your talk, and you know, I was thinking about, you know, beyond the data, what is the information telling you, right? And so, you know, part of that, one of those thoughts is sort of aspirational. My father came to this country in the 60s from Sicily. My mother's parents came to this country from mainland Italy in the late 1800s. Mm-hmm. So they had a very specific vision of the American dream. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I wonder is what is the vision of the American dream for the new immigrants? Is it the same? Is it different? And if so, how?
There's no difference. Everybody comes to America. Our value proposition is that here it can be done. The structure of opportunity exists in our country, and if you look at the data very carefully, the business startup rate is much higher among immigrants than it is among the native born. Why? Because immigration is a selective process. Not everybody from a country uproots and comes to a place. They are risk takers by definition. Our country was built on that, and we need to understand that if you look at the Silicon Valley effect, all of those booming countries, either the CEO or the co-CEO was what? An immigrant. And so I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't recognize the selectivity of that population and then embrace it to continue our competitiveness in a global marketplace where the new normal is certain uncertainty.
Well, that's great. That's great. And I want to ask another question that kind of relates to that. So I'm an architect, and I think about, you know, what the spatial possibilities are of built environments. And we were talking a little bit earlier, and you kind of touched on some of this relative to the sort of aging population, that this idea of gentrification and civic entrepreneurship and how that can kind of work to kind of build communities. And I described to you, you made me a little more optimistic than I was before I started talking to you about gentrification, the issue of gentrification. Mm-hmm. But you had some interesting ideas that you're exploring to address that sound like they have solid solutions.
Sure. So, I really think aging can be the new strategy for economic development, business growth in our economy, because everything has to change to accommodate an aging population. Whether it be in the person-centered environment, houses need to be renovated to be age-friendly and the like. Our public infrastructure needs to be renovated. Our private infrastructure needs to be renovated and the like to accommodate an aging population. So that can be a driver in and of itself of change, economic opportunity, and growth. And I think the region that gets this right first is going to have an incredible competitive advantage in the marketplace. Because if you don't fix it, you are one slip and fall from a major lawsuit that's going to probably cost you about $2.5 million. It's cheaper to fix it than to litigate it. And so be enlightened, what I would say. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I should be telling my folks at home, but it's, it is the driver, I think, because this is one of the most predictable things in the world. You're gonna get old. Some of you already there, including me.
Well, you discussed an idea with me at the table about accessory dwelling units, mm-hmm. And how that can function to kind of deal with issues of gentrification.
ADUs? Yeah. So how do we help seniors age in place? An accessory dwelling unit is like your mother-in-law's flat in the backyard. 500 to 700 square feet, for the home health care worker or your mother-in-law. I'm advocating that we don't pay home health care workers very well now. What would happen if we built accessory dwelling units and gave them an equity stake in home ownership and the like, and assigned them a cluster of seniors to look at where they have a pedestrian journey to work? It increases density in your community, it reduces traffic patterns, the impact on the environment is minimized and the like, and people have a stake in the American dream of home ownership and a whole range of other things. So our demography gives us a certain set of things that if we are smart, we can take advantage of them and build multi-generational, mixed income kinds of communities. We've just, in North Carolina, we've just had the opening. We built a tiny home for the first senior citizen. It's 504 square feet at a price point of $230 a month. Right across the street from a new house that's $450,000. It can be done. Got to have the will to do it.
And that's something you developed a patent for, correct?
Well, we developed a patent for a modular age-friendly home and a modular accessory dwelling unit. Stay tuned. I'll have y'all in Aruba next year for this meeting.
So it is fascinating for me to think about how that can affect how cities develop and grow. Do you see broader impacts to, I mean, if you look right now at sort of the second-tier suburbs and how they're not kind of holding their value, do you see any way to kind of adapt that to this new model with regard to the aging community?
Everything has to change everywhere.
Yeah.
I just think that the trend is for, as you age and have become empty nesters, although some of us feel like we're never going to become empty nesters because of our boomerang crumb snatchers, but as we do age, what do you want to do? You want to downsize, and you want to be in a place where it's walkable, it's livable, and a place like Columbus, because you have a university and world-class health care, we know where these things are really going to occur. If you look at retiree migration, they want to be where amenities are, but you can have all the amenities in the world. If you don't have world-class health care within 30 to 45-minute commute, they're not coming. So you have a competitive advantage, but you got to figure out. The challenge is how do you make sure that your older, low-income, fixed-income population is built and incorporated into the mix. And that's where I think some of these innovative housing designs, strategies for home modifications to keep people in their homes and the like come in. But it's a real viable opportunity, I would say.
So working off of that, you had touched on education a little earlier, and I like hearing these ideas about innovations relative to civic entrepreneurship having to do with how people live. But what about this question of public education and innovations that could help with that situation? Are there any things that you're thinking about or working on right now?
I think, first of all, the biggest challenge in America today is to get those of us who are aging baby boomers to understand that we do have a dog in the K-12 education fight. It's called the future competitiveness of our nation. And I've been thinking about this really hard on how could I explain it to us baby boomers. And I'm going to try it on you all. Here's what I say to baby boomers. Says, you know, sooner or later you're going to reach the age that somebody's going to have to take care of you. You do want them to be able to count your pills. Okay? You don't invest in education? I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I can show you some data to say I wouldn't want to rely on it right now. So we can't be just looking inward. We got to think about the future competitiveness of our nation. Investing in education of the young people that I showed you here is a form of enlightened self-interest. That's going to be the population that propels our nation in the global marketplace. And we all should be invested in ensuring that they get a world-class education.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. In a few minutes, we were going to move into audience questions. Before we do that, I want to leave kind of you with one final question. There are a lot of community leaders and activists in this room today. If we could do one thing today based on the information and data that you showed us, what would you say that would be?
Continue the conversation, but not just to talk for the sake of talking. Think strategically about how you can leverage the competitive advantages that exist in your demographic realities. They are not problem. They constitute an opportunity to get it right.
Excellent. And
to become recognized as a world-class leader in age-friendly kind of community development.
Thank you so much. It's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. So please state your name, ask your question, and we thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments. So if someone would like to ask a question, there's a microphone located somewhere here. Oh, at the back. Thank you. Oh, we see someone getting up.
Yes, my name is John McKnight. So based on a lot of the slides that you showed, the data that you gave, it sounds a little bit like if we don't make some significant changes, we're a little bit doomed as a society. Is that correct? I mean, obviously we need to change. We need to keep growing, keep evolving, keep reaching for the things, the changes we need to accomplish. But if we don't make huge strides, are we really in trouble?
I personally think we are, because I think we have to look at where we exist today in the larger global context. There are countries out there who've made a conscious decision to invest in a cadre of their population, and they made a conscious decision to develop the technological infrastructure to connect them with the world and a population to rule the world. I'm reminded that when I talk to my international students that I teach, my Indian students tell me that their high school education is more rigorous than an MBA training program. And they say they have two routes to success: be an engineer or a medical doctor. Anything else is a failure. And so we are competing. We're busy focused on testing, and they're focused on ruling the world. And so I think that we're no longer competing with our neighbors across the street, the next county over. We're competing in a global marketplace that is pretty, the competition is pretty horrific. And so we have to move up and not read our press clippings from the past.
So, but part two of the question is, how soon is the doom and gloom coming?
You didn't pay me for that today.
Cavernous. Oh, there you go. I have to bend. I'm tall. So you focused on two things, the browning and graying of America. A lot of your recommendations I heard really focused on the opportunity in the graying of America and the needs and the changes, as an example of the, the walkways and the time it takes. What are some of those key needs and changes that you're going to see or that we need to focus on as it relates to the browning of America?
Eliminating the enormous socioeconomic and racial inequality that exists in those segregation slides that I showed you. Creating equitable opportunities for development and growth, improving and creating opportunities for those kids who are in those racially isolated schools and poorly funded schools, improving the allocation of resources there, improving the quality of education that those young people get, I think is very, very important. We're doing some of this. We've built, for an example, in Durham, we've built our own school for vulnerable children as a beta test site for new ideas and innovations for how you educate kids. And the whole goal is to develop a franchisable model of public education that we can replicate that says, if you want to educate the population that we're concerned about, this is how you do it. And so I think thinking creatively, first of all, viewing that as a major problem, and then secondly, thinking creatively about how do we solve this problem, understanding that inequality is bad for business.
Roger Blackwell. Harry Dent's selling a lot of books these days using some of the demographics that you've just shown us. Mm-hmm. And he predicts that when baby boomers downsize, move out of their homes, and there's not many young people who can buy their homes or maybe have their student loans paid off or interest in buying them in suburbs of Columbus, that'll create a big decline in housing prices in the very soon future. Do you agree with that or not?
Who's going to be able to buy them? Because if you look at 55% of millennials who are bachelor's degree holders under age 25 are either unemployed or underemployed. Who's going to buy them?
Sell our houses now if we can, right?
I mean, so, you know, that's a challenge that we have because that's why I call them boomerang crumb snatchers. I said it being facetious, but it's the reality. They're not buying houses, they're not buying cars, they're not marrying, and all of that. You need all of that to be going on to create a viable and booming economy. But this is a very, very interesting kind of economy. If you look at the last 3 recessions, long-term joblessness, defined as being unemployed 6 months or longer, increased more rapidly among people with some college, a bachelor's degree or higher than it did among people with a high school diploma or less. We've been in a white-collar recession for the last 20 years. Having a degree is necessary, but it may not be sufficient to thrive and prosper in an economy and society today where the new normal is certain uncertainty.
Hi, Lauren Sega here. You spoke a lot about the impact of the aging baby boomer population, but I'm wondering, as the millennial and even the Gen X population ages, and as the opiate crisis stunts these populations, what do you see as the larger economic impact of that?
Of them aging?
Well, these smaller populations.
Actually, the millennial population is pretty big. It rivals the boomer population. I think the challenge is with that population is assuring that creating environments where they are able to leverage their creative juices in the marketplace to create new businesses and viable opportunities. So this whole notion of a creative economy and the like, but there's so many economic trends like the gig economy, and outsourcing, offshoring, and things of that nature. You got to have a global lens on thinking about where the structure of opportunity exists. My belief is that we've never taken a back seat to anybody, but I think what we need to do is create environments where people are able to think crazy thoughts. 9 out of 10 of them may be bona fidely crazy, but one of them may be the next revolution that transforms our society. Right now, we put kids in a box in public education, and when they don't fit, we say they have attention deficit disorder. The most creative people in the world got attention deficit disorder. We need more of it.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think all of us enjoyed today's forum. Thank you so much for being here. We want to remind you, you can rewatch all of that good data through a number of sources, through Columbus Television, CTV, through WOSU and PBS affiliates throughout the state, via the Ohio channel, and through the CMC website via YouTube. Let's thank once again our sponsors for today, 10 TV, AEP, and Dispatch Media Group. And to our hosts today, Michael Bongiorno and Jim Johnson, thank you so much for everything you shared today. And we hope to see you again next week. Have a good one.